I'll just give everyone a minute to connect. It can take a minute. Oops. I accidentally muted all of my panelists. I apologize. Trying to do the best thing here, but hopefully you can take yourself off mute. Hi everybody, welcome to our webinar this afternoon. So today we really are looking at the theme for National Reconciliation Week this year, which is Be a Voice for Generations, with a focus on youth voice, which is something that is really passionate for me. Working at Reconciliation SA, it's something we try to embed in our practice within the education portfolio here. We're going to roll straight into a panel, and I will let our panelists introduce themselves shortly. But before we get into the formalities of today, I would like to acknowledge that the land that we meet on today is where I am from, is the Ghana country, and pay my respects to elders past and present who still hold a really deep connection to this land. And it's with their generosity and their, I guess, investment in me and in my organisation that I'm able to do this work and do it in a meaningful way. I acknowledge that there are probably other people meeting from other countries, and so I want to extend that respect to the countries that you are on, and to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people that are joining the meeting today as well. We really appreciate your knowledge and your giving the time to join us in this learning this afternoon. So we have a chat box which you can use at any time. Just, being mindful that I'm kind of managing all the tech, and so I'll get to those kinds of things as I can. But please, if you have a question for the panel, you can pop that in the chat box. And also, if you are on a country that you would like to acknowledge, please pop that in the chat as well, because I love to see how far and wide people are joining from. So thank you. So we will get straight into our panel. We've got 4 incredible panelists that have generously given their time this afternoon to hopefully help us all build a little bit more understanding about what youth voice and participation looks like when it comes to decision making in reconciliation processes and reconciliation action plans. And while we're focusing on children and young people, you'll find that a lot of what we talk about today is very relevant to just community approaches and collective approaches to reconciliation work as a whole. So I'm just going to pick on people and get you to introduce yourselves. And because you're the first box I can see, I'm going to ask Jasmine to introduce herself.
Thanks, Natalie. I'm a proud Wurrungu and Gulgada Aboriginal woman and primary school teacher, originally from Ceduna on the far west coast of South Australia. I've had over 10 years of educational experience working as a primary school teacher and also as an Aboriginal community engagement officer all across South Australia and also the Northern Territory, in both the public and private sectors as well. I guess a lot of my passion comes around embedding Aboriginal cultures and histories into the curriculum and also within educational settings as well. At the moment, I'm working for World Vision Australia in their advocacy team, specifically around First Nations advocacy and social justice issues, and particularly this year with a focus on the Voice to Parliament and the referendum coming up later on this year. And I guess from what I've been able to do within education so far over the past 10 years, I've had some really great opportunities. And I guess one of those as a highlight for me is presenting alongside my uncle Eddie Betts last year on making change in education. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Amazing. Thanks, Jasmine. Such a big bio. So good. I'm going to throw to you, Mili, if that's okay.
Thanks, Natalie. Hello, everyone. My name's Mili Filmer. I'm a Year 12 student at Cornerstone College, which is in the Adelaide Hills, Ontario Monk Country. And I've spent this year organising students from Year 7 to 12, organising a First Nations student group at my school, which is very exciting and I'm excited to talk about.
Thanks so much, Mili. And then I'll throw to Julie.
Thanks, Nat, and hi everyone. Before I let you know who I am, I'd just like to recognise and acknowledge that I'm here on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country, and I'd love to pay my respects to elders of this place, past and present, and recognise that wherever we are in Australia, we're on unceded Aboriginal land, and I'd like to extend that respect to the Aboriginal people in the room today as well. My name's Julie Bover and I work for Reconciliation Australia. I work for the Narragansett team. So Narragansett is a program that supports schools and services around Australia to work towards reconciliation in a planned and meaningful way. I'm also a teacher. I've worked in early childhood and primary settings. And I've been working in the education space, including the reconciliation and education space for almost 20 years now. It's been a long time. And yeah, I'm excited to have this conversation today. So thanks, Nat.
And then Caterina, thanks.
Hi everyone, my name is Caterina Pennestri and I am an atelierista, an art educator that is working at St. Peter Girl Early Learning Centre in Adelaide, in Stonyfell. And 2 years ago, my center, my ELC, was a finalist for the Narangula Award, as Julie described before, this beautiful project that is supporting school and educational center and ELC and childcare to really create a meaningful curriculum where the Aboriginal, the First People, culture can be supported and embedded in the everyday practice. So I've been lucky to be part of this journey, and today I want to share our experience and give our contribution, especially because every day we feel we are giving voice to the future generations with our contribution and with our experience at the ELC.
Thank you so much, Caterina. So we'll just get started. So today's webinar is really focusing on the theme for National Reconciliation Week, Be a Voice for Generations. So I guess my first question, whoever wants, I guess, to take this question first, is what do you understand voice to mean, particularly in the context of Australia at the moment? Who wants to jump in? Who's brave? Otherwise, I'll pick on people.
I will start. I will be
Thank you, Caterina.
the brave one. I just want to start because my center is also Reggio Emilia inspired, and Reggio Emilia is this beautiful international, is an Italian pedagogical center where the voice of the children is like a metaphor of their presence. We need to listen to their voice, and their voice is also not only what they are saying, is not only a quote, but is also a political presence, because the children are citizens, the children have rights from the moment of birth. So for me, the voice is not only what they are saying, what they are describing, that is important, but is also their political actions, their political opinion, their position in the world, and their rights. So this is my vision, and is the vision that I wanna also, when I'm talking about the culture of the Aboriginal First People, and especially the Ghana culture that is our reality every day here at the ELC. I see the children and the young people that are around us as a citizen with rights, responsibilities, and with a voice that they can share with the society, with us, and with everyone. So this is my interpretation.
Thank you, Caterina. And I'll try and share some of the Thinker in Residence work from Carla Rinaldi. For those of you who are maybe not as familiar with Reggio Emilia, I think it is interesting reading, particularly if you are working in an early childhood environment, you know, in that consideration of children as citizens and children being born with a set of rights from birth, I think really ties in nicely to the conversations today. So thank you, Caterina. I might throw to you, Jasmine, on that question. What's your interpretation of voice?
I guess I'm probably thinking more from the child's perspective, in that, you know, it's a way to communicate, you know, with those around you, whether it's your teachers, educators, family members, people within your community. And, you know, if we're talking about the context of this year particularly, and, you know, what's happened in the past, I feel as though, you know, First Nations voices have not been a part of the dialogue, you know, and for a long time as well, we haven't seen those voices represented within the education system as well. And we are starting to see a shift in that as well. There are some fantastic programs and a lot of schools doing great things, but, you know, children want to be heard. They want to feel as though, you know, what they have to say matters, and, you know, they should be able to have a say on their education and, you know, what's happening in the classroom, and also in the community as well. So, you know, I think children knowing that their voice and matters, I feel like they will thrive in an environment like that as well.
Thanks, Jasmine. Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think, you know, we're kind of talking today about engaging all children and young people in these matters, but obviously at the heart of everything we do is First Nations peoples and First Nations children and young people, and how we can involve them more in decisions that are directly impacting their lives. So yeah. Mili, how about you as a student? What do you interpret that question to mean, I guess?
I think for me, a big part of the voice is having someone there who's actually listening to it. And I think that that's really important, because I know sometimes as a young person, and I'm very lucky, like not in majority of my experiences, I haven't had this, but sometimes you feel like you're saying something and you're talking to a brick wall. So having someone, and, you know, adults, but also just people who are older than you, having someone who is listening and who is able to take on that voice and then from there provide influence. And I think that's really what makes voice powerful.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I think like that's a really important thing to consider, and particularly in considering where we are as a society in Australia at the moment with conversations around the voice to Parliament is actually, you know, how are we inviting not just people to be heard, but how do we listen and then action and make change based on what we're being told, which I think is what makes it meaningful voice. So, and Julie.
Yeah, thanks, Nat, and thanks everyone. I guess I will reflect on the NRW theme for this year, being Be a Voice for Generations, and what that means in terms of voices and whose voices are valued in Australian society, and whose voices are we highlighting when we think of previous generations, and how are we using our voice to support an Australia that we all want to engage with into the future, and that future generations can be proud to be a part of, in that sense. I really liked the conversation about rights and responsibilities. So with voice comes rights and responsibilities. And again, thinking about historically whose rights have not been upheld, whose rights are currently being upheld, and what that means for the decisions that we make when we are adults, and how we can use our voice to influence decisions when we are adults, but also how can we help students and children to understand the power of their voice, support the power of their voice. But also, I think it's important to think about, when we're talking about voices and whose voices we listen to, listening. So it's, on one hand, we have voices who are speaking and wanting to be heard, and thinking about whose voices are heard in Australian society. But on the flip side of that is whose voices should we be listening to, and whose voices are we not very good at listening to sometimes. I think that's important to bring to children as well to understand.
Thank you. Yeah, and I do think it is really important in having these conversations about thinking about, well, what are we talking about when we're saying 4 generations, which is we're thinking about our future and putting things in place for a better future. So the next question, I think, links really nicely to what you said, Mili, so I might throw this one to you first. So do you think that giving children and young people a voice is enough? Or are there other things that we need to consider to make voice meaningful?
I guess it all kind of just depends on your definition of voice.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for me, if you're taking voice at face value and just, people can say things, I think that definitely more needs to be done than that. I think voice means nothing. Like I said, voice means nothing without someone listening to it. And I think, for just following on from the question, what else could be done? I think there needs to be opportunity to turn voice into action, and also willingness to listen and respond to voice.
Thank you. Yeah, really good points. And I think, yeah, it's just converting people to be those willing listeners and willing to take action on that. I might throw to you, Jasmine, as well. I think particularly, obviously, we're talking about children and young people, but we are in this very unique time politically as well. So do you think that voice is enough, or what other things would you be putting on the table when it comes to this?
Yeah, and Mili, I think you summed it up really well. One of the words that I had down was action. When children bring something to you from, in the classroom or in an educational context, they want to know that they're being heard, and that what they're telling you, it matters, that they're entrusting you with what they're sharing with you, whether it's, something personal, something to do with their schoolwork, something within the community, their culture, and I feel as though their voices need to be listened to, but then also, does action need to be taken from here, and how can we support our young people? How can we support them through this journey? But also making sure that they're a part of that process as well, because, I think too many times there are children who speak up and they want their voices heard, but then, the teacher or educator might say, look, I'll get back to you on this, but then, they don't get back to them. And then the student is left wondering, what happens next? So, I think it's really important for that student or those students to feel involved with that process that happens with the action as well.
Thanks. Yeah, look, I agree with that so wholeheartedly. I think often when we talk about action, we misunderstand that to be that we have to do every single thing that children and young people tell us to do, and that the only way we can meaningfully engage in this is if we action their ideas. But sometimes things are, for whatever reason, out of our control, we can't achieve, but it's about that going back to the students, and that, co-design and co-creation is all about working together and problem solving together. So I think that's really
and just
important.
Keeping, that open dialogue, I think, with one another, That was one of the biggest things for me in the classroom, was relationships, and also being able to have an open dialogue with my students. So, they know that they can speak to me about anything, and I can speak to them about anything as well. So ensuring that their voice is respected and also listened to.
Yes,
amazing.
I think that is fundamental to create a forum where the young people and the children can be listened to, because it's beautiful to give a voice or to support a voice, but if we don't listen, if we don't record, if we don't document and then create actions, it could be more frustrating for them. They can scream, they can be very loud, they can express their languages, their actions, their voices, but then is our responsibilities as well, is the society responsibilities to really, first of all, to listen, to record, to remember, and to create actions.
So thanks, Caterina. Yeah, I think that's really interesting point, and gives some of our participants today some things to really think about in terms of practical action as well, on how you can actually do those actions, and that recording of ideas and using it to, I guess, inform your practice as well is a really important part of this.
And then I just want to say something that could be also another metaphor of voice, is the opportunity to know, to give to the young children the opportunity to know about the culture. In our case, is the Ghana culture. We have children that are 2 years old, that they have their voice is the Ghana language. They say their acknowledgement every day, and they talk with their friends using Ghana words, and hopefully they are their first words. And we are creating this curriculum that is filled with respect for the Ghana culture, for the First Nations people rituals. And for us is important, because for them, we are listening to their voice that is extremely connected with the history of the land, of the country. And for them is an opportunity. Their voice will be then an action, because they grow up with that, is natural for them. And this is for me also be a voice for a generation. Yes, it's also be an opportunity to open their eyes, to be listened to, and to really change for the future.
Thank you, Caterina. That's great. And Julie?
Yeah, thank you, Caterina. I want to pick up on what you said about listening, what everyone said actually, to listen about listening to student voice. So, and this is specifically for those of us in the space who are teachers and educators, kind of the action that we need to take when we hear student voice. So often when we're talking about reconciliation themes, students will use their voice to say things that are sometimes challenging to us, especially those of us who are white or non-Indigenous. So we will hear things from students that may challenge our own ideas of our understandings. And we also need to recognise that in the classroom or within early learning service rooms, we as teachers and educators are in a position of power. And so we need to provide spaces for students and children to speak up to us in positions of power, but then that can also be translated to, when you translate that to reconciliation themes and conversations about reconciliation themes, we need to think then about what we know as teachers and educators about being Australian and our position within Australia as an adult. And what that means for opportunities for students and children to learn about the true history of Australia, and to learn once they have done some of that learning, to actually speak up to people in positions of power. And a classroom is a really wonderful space to begin that kind of learning, because it's a good way to practice for children and students to say, okay, well, here's this thing that I've been taught or that I know, and I'm now finding out is not necessarily true, and that makes me feel a certain thing. What will I do with that? And if they're in a space where they're able to test and trial speaking up to power in, like, to a teacher or an educator, then they will learn how to kind of, that will be nurtured within them, and they will be able to do that. But also on that same kind of idea is that, how do we use students' voices to reflect on our own kind of voice and our own position, and then take the student voice through us to actually act? How, you know, that would be my challenge to teachers and educators. How can you do that?
That's such an interesting point, Julie. And it's like, just before the webinar started, I was talking to Mili about the kind of generational change in how, you know, we're starting to, it's still not perfect, but we're definitely starting to see more young people empowered to question people in those positions of authority and power, comparatively to, I think, what some of us grew up doing, and some of those like cultural things that have been passed down to us. And, you know, it's not to say we need to go all militant and storm classrooms, but having those open dialogues and conversations is so empowering for all of us, and puts us more on an equal playing field. So and it was something I hadn't actually considered. You just really helped me to put that all in a tidy place in my brain. That doesn't happen very often. It's very messy in there. So I guess we've kind of covered this, but I want to be a bit more explicit about it. Why is it so important for children and young people to participate in matters that are affecting them directly? So I might throw to you again, Mili. Sorry, just putting you on the spot. Yeah.
That's all good. I mean, it's a cliche, but children are the future and young people are the future. And I think that, as a young person myself, I think it's very important to have a say on what experiences you're going to have as you grow up and, you know, become an adult and all that sort of scary stuff. I also think that modern, like young people, and I don't want to say modern young people, but I think like we were talking before, with just generational changes, I think that young people nowadays have a variety of different perspectives that they bring to the table, more so than has been in the past. I think with more multicultural and cross-cultural communication, things provided by social media and stuff online, I think it has really broadened the perspectives and broadened the understanding of young people in a way that I think is really beneficial. And I think that not extra knowledge, but the broader perspectives that young people often have, I think is really important when making decisions.
Thank you. I might then ask Caterina, why do you think it's important for children? I mean, coming from an early learning setting, why is it so important for the children in your setting to participate in the decisions that happen around them?
First of all, because all the decisions that we are making, they have consequences in their life. Now, not only their life in the future, but also their life now, because their family is living in this society, they are living in this society, so they will breathe. We are the product of every day of our life, not just when we are adults. So from day one, we are experiencing, we are all what we are living. So of course, to me, it's important, every decision that we are taking for them for them and around them must take in consideration their perspective, their thoughts, their dream. And also it's something that they need to understand as soon as possible. They can have an impact in the society. The earlier they will understand, the children and the young people especially, they know that their dreams, their expectations, their ideas can be taken in consideration, and they can have an impact on everyone's life and in the world around them. So this is also an active way to live the life, because as a young person, I know I have the responsibilities, and I know that what I do and my ideas, my dreams, my actions can have an impact in the world around me. So it's an active and empowering way to live a life, instead to say, oh, it doesn't matter, wherever I do, I can do wherever, nothing will make an impact around me. So the earlier we'll understand the importance of their ideas, their values, the earlier we'll understand, the earlier they understand, the more impact their beautiful thoughts will have around them and for us as well. Young children and young people, they are really a resource for us. They are our energy. They are they are very dynamic, the freshness of their ideas, and I'm talking also regarding the children. Sometimes is what is missing in the pieces that are missing to resolve some problems. So sometimes they can give us straight away.
Thank you, Caterina. And I think it's really interesting that when we talk about, I guess, active and engaged citizenship for these young children and young people, it is a reciprocal relationship. It's not just that we are engaging them in some things, but actually we're building their capacity and understanding to also engage in the world and see that the impact that they can make. So it is kind of going back to what you said before about providing opportunity and giving them the opportunity to see the world in a different way, which is so important. So I might throw to Julie just on why you think this is important.
Yeah, thanks, Nat. I think something to consider while we're having this chat about student voice and how it kind of fits in is where students can contribute to a reconciliation action plan. So if student voice is captured within a RAP working group, all of those things that Caterina was just speaking about and Mili spoke about as well can kind of help to guide the work of a school or a service. The freshness, also just the types of ideas that students have and children have. So it is a good idea to include students in your RAP working group, especially for students such as Mili and kind of that 7 to 12 age bracket, because you do have wonderful things to say. And Mili, I can see that you are a leader, and that's the kind of leadership that RAP working groups really need. And then one more really quick thing on that point, as more of a personal point, but just about the impact that student or children's voice can have. If you do provide an honest and accurate information to children, they then can take that and use their voice to support others. And I just wanted to give an example of my 8-year-old who openly calls out racism when it happens in her school. So it can actually make change in contexts that we live in every day. So thanks, Nat.
And Jasmine.
I thought I might use the opportunity to share, and just going off of Julie, what you said about, children being involved with that RAP working group within the school. So the school where my son attends, they've actually got a junior RAP working group, and that group is made up of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students of the school. But for each meeting, they've been asked to invite a friend whether it's in their class or, you know, within the school, along to that meeting. And, you know, a lot of the time these are non-Indigenous people being invited as well. So, you know, they're able to see what the school is doing, you know, towards reconciliation. And, you know, they're finding now that there are so many passionate students within the school that want to be a part of this change, and that, you know, that group then has their voices heard by the RAP working group, which is made up of parents and staff members, the principal of the school, and then that is then reflected up, you know, to their board. So, you know, knowing that their voice in all of this, you know, is important, and, you know, particularly those Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children, you know, they're able to participate in those matters that affect them within a school context, and, you know, they're able to say and share on what they'd like to see, you know, happening within a school. And it's so important for their voices to be heard in all of this, but, you know, for that then to fluctuate, I guess, out into the broader school community, you know, and to have more people, not more non-Indigenous people as allies and wanting to learn more about Aboriginal culture, people, their histories, you know, it does make me so proud to be a part of that school community, knowing that, you know, that there is such a respected place for the students as they come up through this primary school. So, you know, I highly recommend, you know, if there's schools out there, to have, like Julie said, students a part of that RAP working group, so that students have the opportunity to have a say on matters that affect them.
Thanks, Jasmine. And that is a really nice segue into the next question, which is, which you've kind of answered, but maybe you might have, I might throw back to you in a sec, but why is a community approach, like an approach that I guess includes voices and perspectives of everyone that's involved in that school or education community, important in reconciliation processes and the development of a RAP?
When, you know, I think about reconciliation within a schooling context, and it can't just be one person, you know, driving that within a school. You know, we need more people walking alongside of us as First Nations people, and, you know, we need more people going on this journey towards reconciliation with us as well. And, you know, parents and caregivers, particularly, you know, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander parents and family members, you know, their views of education have changed over the years as well, and it's really important to remember that during this process as well. But having them a part of the school and what the school is trying to do with, you know, those relationships with First Nations people, or the community involvement, you know, that they're wanting to do, I think it's so important to bring everyone along on that journey, you know, not just teachers, not just students, but the whole wider community as well. And I think, you know, it's a ripple effect, isn't it? The more people, you know, and I think of this as an example, you know, the more children that are invited to this junior RAP working group meeting, you know, the more that's then going to, you know, span out into their classrooms, and then, you know, that those conversations will carry on into their home lives as well, and, you know, with their friends and families. And, you know, I that's how I feel, you know, particularly around the Voice to Parliament as well. It's those small conversations, you know, and inviting different people along this journey to really to really capture what reconciliation is and what we're working towards as well.
Yeah, amazing.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Sorry, hopefully that made sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I might throw to Julie on this one as well, someone who's very familiar with the Reconciliation Action Plan process. Why is that community approach, do you think, so important?
For all the reasons that Jasmine just outlined, absolutely. And I mean, we can't do reconciliation without a community approach because reconciliation is just so place-based. It's very much about connecting with the traditional custodians of the place on which your service operates or your school is. But it's definitely a lot more than that. And having a reconciliation action plan and reconciliation action plan work does, as Jasmine said, does ripple out to the community, and it does that in lots of ways. But what I wanted to kind of bring to the teachers and educators in the space is to think, if we think about a community approach and working together with traditional custodians and other Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander people who are living in the community that you're working and living in as well. I just want to go back to kind of at the beginning of the conversation when we were talking about whose voices have traditionally and are currently heard. So as teachers and educators, as non-Indigenous teachers and educators, we can't sit in a classroom and teach about Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander cultures. But what we do need to do is bring community voices into those learning spaces. So that's our role, is to say, okay, well, I've got these curriculum areas that I need to teach, or I have these areas of the early years learning framework that I'm focusing on, is to understand our voice is not the voice that needs to be heard in that scenario, but we need community voices in our classrooms and settings. And that doesn't necessarily always mean, I mean, ideally, yes, that is a community member that's in your classroom or learning space with you, but remembering that that hearing voices doesn't, sometimes there can be barriers to those things happening, and Jasmine touched on it, that sometimes Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's experiences of educational settings makes it unsafe for them to share their voice in that same setting, or sometimes students will be reluctant, or parents will be reluctant, or community members may be reluctant because of those types of experiences. But it's still our job to bring voices into the classroom. So that's where using videos and other forms of voice and bringing voice into classrooms that way is super important. But remembering, I think it's really important for us to think about whose voices are valued, and that goes back again to unpacking our own kind of ideas about being Australian and understanding the true history of Australia, so that we can say, okay, these people's voices have been silenced or haven't been heard well. How am I hearing voices, and what does that mean for how I translate those voices to my students or the children in my care? And the best, I mean, we need to do self-reflection first, but then we need to build those relationships with community. Once we're in a safe place within ourselves, then build those relationships with communities so that those voices can not just be heard, but actually be upheld and be made more important than ours in those spaces. And that's the work that we need to do as teachers and educators. And a RAP can help us to do that, because it kind of sets out the steps, it provides the resources. And if you engage with the professional learning in a deep way, then you will find that you'll be learning those skills and getting those understandings so that you can do this work in a really safe, community-based way.
Thanks, Julie. I might just move on to the next question, as we've hit kind of our time frame for the panel, but I'm interested in, I guess, just the final question I have is, well, what are some practical ways that education sites and schools and early learning settings can include the voices of children and young people when it comes to their RAPs and other reconciliation matters? And I might go to Caterina first. We seem to have lost Mili, so hopefully she'll come back on, but if not, what an amazing person, and yeah, great to have her. So yeah, Caterina, what are some ways in which we can include the voice of children in these reconciliation processes?
For us, I just wanna say something about the RAP, and I will connect the two about the rap and the importance of the community in the rap. I think, and this is something important that I would like to tell and congratulate with all of you, that you are working with Reconciliation Australia and supporting this idea of the rap as a really declaration of the importance of also having this political action and this guide. And it's important for us to have the rap and to include all the different steps in our everyday. So this is what it can make really the difference in a school setting, to have a guide, because sometimes we don't know where to start, and the rap, in my opinion, is really changing the landscape of the schools, but in general to any kind of association that needs to have a rap. For us, listening to the voice of the children is fundamental, and we do in every aspect. Also, when we are planning our curriculum, our central idea, the observation of the children are fundamental. But as I said, we need to expose the children to the truth of the history of this country. The children needs to be exposed, as you say, to the elders, to the community, to people that can bring the knowledge, and then as educators we can spread the knowledge when the elders or the community members are not with us for different reasons, as happened with us with the elder Tamaru, that for years was our mentor, and he shared with us his knowledge. And now that he's not collaborating with us anymore, we are able to keep going and remember all the knowledge. And now the children will give us the next inspiration. We are very lucky to be a big team of educators that are very tuned to listen to their voice, and we are working with other young girls that have, as Milika, they have this attitude and this inspiration to spread their tradition and their history, and creating this relationship in our community. This is the way that we really want to bring the voice of the children and the young people in our daily practice. This is what we are trying to do.
Thanks, Caterina. Mili, I know that you have got to run in a second to another event because you're very busy, but I'm just wondering if you have any final thoughts that you would like to share with the panel on how teachers can, I guess, practically and meaningfully include voices of young people in reconciliation work.
Yeah, for sure. And I must apologize. I had a bit of a technical issue, so I've missed the last couple of minutes, but I'm back now. I think for me, a big part of it is mutual respect. And we're very lucky at Cornerstone. Our First Nations focus people are absolutely awesome. And it's a real community, I think, within the college that works towards reconciliation. But yes, I think that being able to cultivate mutual respect and an environment, which I think we've done at Cornerstone with the First Nations student group, an environment where you are able to say things that might be challenging to say in other places, or, for First Nations students, a place where they are able to share their culture and share their beliefs and be heard by their peers, which might be not difficult, but it's not always a space for in at lunchtime or that sort of thing. So I think for me the big thing is the mutual respect and the creating the space and the relationships where voices can be heard and voices can be listened to, and change and actions can occur.
Amazing, thank you. And if you do need to pop off, because I know you've got to be somewhere at 5:45, please, I won't be offended. And so I think just finishing up with Jasmine and Julie, I guess what are your thoughts around practical ways? What can teachers do to start engaging students? Maybe Jasmine first and then Julie.
Yeah, sure. I think just going back to the example before that I used around the junior rap working group, you know, I personally don't know of too many schools that have something like this set up, that has a whole group with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students that are enrolled at the school, but also in inviting those non-Indigenous students to be a part of that journey and into the meetings. So, and I do believe that it has to be a different person each meeting so that different people have exposure to the junior rap working group. But like Mili was saying, you know, that environment where they meet, it needs to be a safe environment, because, you know, our First Nations children are, you know, they are quite vulnerable, and sometimes what they might share, you know, needs to be held in a safe environment and context, and, you know, for that voice to be heard, and, you know, for them to share about their educational journey. I think it's really important that teachers make that a priority, and, you know, to ensure that we're not just wanting to have just a few meetings a year, you know, like we're wanting to see this ongoing, and, you know, we are wanting to see that ripple effect, you know, like I had said, you know, go out into the community and for those conversations, and, you know, for children to go back home and say like, hey, mum and dad, like, look what I learned today, or did you know this? Or, you know, I'd really like to learn more about, you know, the Kaurna people, or the Kaurna culture, like, can we go to this event, you know? And I think those conversations, they start at school, don't they, with children, and, you know, creating those safe environments where all children are able to have those open conversations. I think that's really important.
Yeah, thanks, Jasmine. I completely agree, and I think it's something that we often don't think about, is that before we start looking at voice and how we can engage our students in participating in their decision making, we don't often have those culturally safe or psychologically safe spaces, which means we're not getting the information that we probably want to get. So, and Julie.
Yeah, I don't really actually have much more to add to that. That was really comprehensive. I think that one additional thing we can do as teachers, and something that I did quite heavily when I worked in the classroom, was plan for capturing student voice. So pre-assessment, like in the pre-assessment stage, is the most important, to understand what students know or already understand about a certain thing. And again, I know I've said this lots, but it comes back down to, when you're formulating those questions, you have to understand your own position and understand kind of like, why am I asking this question? What am I trying to elicit by asking this question? What biases am I bringing to the formation of the questions that I'm asking students? And what does that mean for safety, for both Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students and non-Indigenous students? And even just the phrasing of a question can give students clues as to what you think, and students will try to give you the answers that they think you want to hear in a lot of cases. So we need to be careful with the way that we phrase things, and yeah, make lots of opportunities to hear student voice, and prove that you're listening to student voice by actioning what they say.
Awesome, thank you. I could honestly, this is like one of my favorite things to talk about. I'm an early childhood educator, and I'm just so interested in how we can involve more children and young people in these processes. And so I want to thank all of you for generously giving your time this evening to talk through this. Particularly, I just want to give an extra shout out to Mili, who, you know, this is brave of you to give this a go. Not that you seemed even remotely worried. You're a natural. But thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to Caterina, Jasmine, and Julie Just really an amazing dynamic conversation with so many perspectives, and I hope that our participants tonight have got a lot of things to think about, I guess, and what are they going to do. So I'll let our panelists leave, but for those of you that are in the webinar, you're welcome to stick around. I do have just some resource sharing and things for Reconciliation Week, and hopefully to help your planning for including student voice more broadly. But yeah, we can say goodbye to our panelists and thank them and give them a virtual applause. And yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Natalie.
Thank you. Thanks, Natalie.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
For those of you that are happy to stick around, I've just got a few extra things to go through, just to kind of help maybe to put all of that information together into something that can make sense for you, and thinking about how we can plan for children and young people's voices in these reconciliation processes. So thanks for those that are still here. So really, in terms of the theme for this year, the main things that I really wanted to help you focus on is we often get a bit stuck in the idea that National Reconciliation Week is just one thing that we celebrate, and that's the first time that we might touch or have conversations about reconciliation and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives. And so my hope today is that I can get you thinking way beyond 2023, and particularly in thinking about the children and the young people that we are working with every day, and how we can include them in reconciliation and reconciliation action plans to make those plans more meaningful, and to make those plans more, I guess, holistic and community-based. So the first thing I wanted to touch on with reconciliation planning is really, moving on from that panel, the importance of community approaches when it comes to a reconciliation action plan, but also the implementation of all your goals and your deliverables. I guess when we're looking at embedding reconciliation within everything that your site does, how are you able to truly embed the work that you're doing if your reconciliation work only sits with a couple of people in your organisation, or if you're not including the perspectives of everyone? And when we think about true, meaningful, sustainable and embedded change, everyone needs to have a say and be engaged in this process in some way. And I do think that sometimes we forget about the children and the young people that we're working with. So how do we engage children and young people in decision making? I think it's a really interesting concept to explore, and something that is really passionate for me as someone who works in an organisation where we're constantly thinking about the rights of children and young people and the rights of First Nations people in South Australia. And so I guess for today, what I wanted to introduce you to was a really interesting model of voice and participation that is used globally and has been adopted by places such as the United Nations, but something that is a really practical model, and something that hopefully is really applicable and easy for you to use in an education setting. But also this model is it is designed by someone called Laura Lundy. I think it was designed in 2014, and was something that was really designed with children and young people in mind. However, it is something that can be utilized so much more broadly. If you're ever considering how to have that consultation, that engagement with people in other workplaces, this model is really applicable to those things as well. So if you want to learn more information, after today, I will send out some resources that relate to the webinar, and I'll include some reading that you can do on this. But you can also just Google Lundy's model of participation. It is a great model that can hopefully really inform how you can involve children and young people in reconciliation action planning. So each one of these 4 steps, they go in order. So space, voice, audience, influence, and each one has a really important part to play when it comes to participation. So while we're talking about voice today, we're actually looking at voice as part of a bigger thing, that there are other things that need to be in place. And I think our panelists really quite articulately spoke about the fact that voice is maybe not always enough, and that there needs to be other processes in place. So the first kind of step of this model is space, and we really hit the nail on the head in the panel today, that it's about providing safe and inclusive spaces for children and young people to express their views. So before we even get into conversations about voice and asking children and young people to share their perspectives with us, are we doing so in a safe way where they feel that they can and that they're not going to be judged, or that they're able to I guess, challenge you or question some of the things that they've learned, and how are you providing that safety? And I guess the extension of that is when you're specifically thinking about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and young people, how are you providing culturally safe and psychologically safe spaces for them to participate and for them to express their views freely? The other word that's really important here is inclusive. So inclusive spaces, I think the thing to think about here is when we're providing a space for children and young people to share their views and express their views, you also need to remove barriers to them expressing themselves. So, for example, if you've got children between 0 and 2, they don't have a verbal way of communicating yet. So how do you utilize other ways of their communication? If you're working with, children and young people that are from a part of Australia where English is maybe often not their first language, often their 4th language spoken, how do you support processes for them to be able to express their voice if they're not speaking to you in their, home language, the language that they're the most comfortable speaking? And there is some thinking to do around this as well. If you have children in your setting who use devices to help them with communication or need further supports, how are you going to involve them in this process? Because again, every voice is important to reconciliation, and it will make your work so much more meaningful and something that all your children and young people can connect with. The second step in this process is the voice step. And obviously something that we're talking about a lot when it comes to our political climate at the moment, and also the theme of the webinar. But one of the things we didn't really touch on with the panel that I think is important to note is that a really strong part of voice is ensuring that your children and young people have got all the information. And so if we're asking and facilitating children's expression of their views and young people's expression of their views, are they able to tell you what they want or participate in decision making if you haven't provided them with all the information that is required to make that decision? So a really key part of voice is helping people to understand what it is that they're participating in and what it is that they're going to be making decisions on, or whether it is just sharing ideas, but getting their perspective involves a little bit on our part in educating them. So when it comes to a reconciliation action plan, how do children and young people understand reconciliation, and how do you explain that in age appropriate ways for younger children, and how do we continue educating them, and what sorts of resources can we give them so that they can make it's informed decision making? It's pretty simple, but it's really thinking about those processes ahead of time. And that's when you can then engage them and facilitate their voice and facilitate conversations with them and get them to express their viewpoints. And the other thing, I guess, to consider in this is then how. And I think Caterina made some really interesting points in the panel about, well, you know, how are you going to document their voice and how are you going to support, I guess, the recording of that and making sure that you can revisit that and share their learning with them at later dates, and grow and build upon all of that amazing and rich discussion and information sharing that you'll be having. So then we move into audience, and audience is really important. And I think Mili particularly spoke about this, the fact that you need to have someone with responsibility to listen, and that it's not always enough for children and young people to express their views, but someone needs to be willing and able to hear it. And those people should be decision makers. This is obviously a bit more complicated than just putting a group of children in front of, you know, your school principal, because again, if we're looking at the space section and including safe, culturally safe and psychological safe spaces, they may not be willing to share everything if there is maybe a power dynamic that doesn't feel right, or a leader in the room. But it's about them being able to bring that information to someone, and for, you know, teachers, educators, leaders within your education settings coming to the table and hearing that information and hearing some of those ideas for action at a later date. You can, all of these, again, it's a model, so it's not meant to be taken really in one particular way. It's really flexible, and it needs to be like based on your context and how you run as a school and some of the structures that you may already have in place as well. And then the final step in the Lundi model is influence. And I think, again, this is was really touched on in the panel, but ensuring that children and young people's views are taken seriously and acted upon where appropriate. And so it's about, you know, actually listening to children's views and listening to young people's views. But then when they're coming to you with like a really amazing idea, or they want you to include something in your wrap, or they may just have some ideas that they want you to explore, it's just about, yeah, that idea of taking them seriously. So, you know, no idea is a bad idea, and talking them through whether you can or can't action that, because some children and some young people have really amazing blue skies ideas, but your education site, you might not have the budget, or, you know, you're working with 4-year-olds and they can be fun and silly and excited and have great ideas that are, you know, not always rooted in what you can realistically achieve. And so it's workshopping and problem solving with them and thinking about, well, how can we get to a place where we can do something really good, and how do I respect your ideas and respect your voice and your participation in this in a way where you still feel like you're heard and listened to. So it's really just about coming back to students as well. And I liked what Jasmine said about having those dialogues with problem solving, and also coming back to students when maybe things weren't working, and continuing to work it out with them so that they felt like, you know, there was a follow-up. Because I think we do see a lot, particularly in secondary schools, where students have some really amazing ideas. And I mean, I'm sure we've experienced it in our workplaces as well, where you have an amazing idea and someone says, yeah, like, I'll have a think about it. And then you don't really hear anything more. And you have to either chase them or they don't come back to you. And it makes you feel like not respected, or like, you know, they've forgotten me, or whatever it might be. And children and young people feel those things as well. And we want to have that reciprocal respect. And so modeling that is really important. So for me, I think in terms of facilitating children and young people's voice then in these processes, there is honestly a million different ways when you're thinking about babies all the way to year 12 students. It's complicated and it can look in a lot of different ways. But I do think here's some starting points in which you can probably expand on or workshop to make fit your own settings. So the first is, if you've got children who are able to communicate in that kind of setting, there's no reason that you can't invite them to your RAP working group meetings. So particularly in secondary school settings, we see a lot of value in student representation on a reconciliation action plan working group. And depending on what your decision-making looks like or how you're developing your goals and your deliverables, it can be really engaging and really affirming, I think, for teachers on those groups to hear those young people supporting some of the decision-making that's happening as well. I had an amazing example that I just want to share of a school that have student representatives on their group. So they've got 5 students ranging between year 8 and year 12 on their RAP working group. And in one of the meetings, we were talking through an action on the reconciliation action plan is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the classroom. And the teachers were really ambitious and excited about that and started talking about, well, their deliverables are going to be, we're going to invite people into the classroom. We're going to start making connections and we're going to invite people into our classrooms and start co-creating lessons. And they had some really wonderful ideas. And the students kind of took charge and said, hang on a minute, those ideas are really great, but do you think that our classrooms are culturally safe and ready to invite Aboriginal people in and to co-create lessons? And so their thinking was so important in that situation, because they were able to say, before we do any of this, we need to make sure that our teachers are culturally responsive and that our classrooms look visibly culturally safe and welcoming. And they did a year's worth of work putting up Aboriginal languages maps and artwork and acknowledgement signs on all the classroom doors and cultural responsiveness training for their teachers. So now they're ready to go into that next step. But it's just an example of different types of thinking and the importance of bringing young people along on this journey. The other thing I think is really important is if you can't bring them to your RAP working group meetings, if they're a bit too high level or not super engaging for students, you can also look at subcommittees. And I've seen a lot of primary schools who have kind of action groups, like they might have a sustainability action group, or they might have an action group for the language that they learn at school, like they may be learning Japanese, so they have a Japanese action group that work on different kind of things throughout the year. And so looking at a reconciliation subcommittee, so how can you engage young people in reconciliation processes and support them to build their own group around that? And that leads nicely to SRC. So in a lot of schools, there are, student representative councils, and how can you bring reconciliation to them and help them to make decisions about reconciliation within the school? So is it an agenda item? Is it something that they talk about at all? And just thinking about, I guess, those structures that you already have in place and how you can leverage them or build on them. And then creating opportunities for broader student engagement. So, you don't have to think just about groups or collectively bringing people together. You can also look about, well, in terms of student engagement, are there ways that you can survey your students? Are there ways that you can work together with small groups of students to talk about particular deliverables on your RAP? And same in early learning settings as well. You're not going to be able to necessarily bring 3-year-olds to your reconciliation action plan working group, but there's inquiry that you can do with students to understand what they know. There's ways in which you can use your observation and your learning stories, or however it is that you record and document children's learning, to get a sense of what they know and also what they care about. And, utilising things like children's artwork and how they maybe explore concepts in those ways as well. But just creating all those different kinds of opportunities for children and young people to participate, I guess, in different ways. And then finally, creating space for students to share their ideas in the classroom or in your early learning setting. So how do you gather students' perspectives, and how do you involve everybody in processes, and how do you do that creatively and in ways where you kind of capture varieties of learning and varieties of ways that they can contribute. So we know in adult learning as well, some people like to have a chat, some people like to fill in a survey, some people would prefer to write their ideas down, some people like to talk them through with their colleagues, or maybe they want like one-on-one time. And that's the same with, you know, children and young people. So really thinking about how you can adapt this to their learning and their perspectives. But there's heaps of ideas that you can take from these kind of 5 starting points. And always in these kind of webinars, I love to put it out there to people that if you have a great idea or a process that's working amazing for you, or you give something a go and you want to share it, flick me an email and let me know, because we love to hear about what schools and early learning sites are doing. And it's something that helps us to continually engage with people and share what's going on in the education world, and hopefully like encourage and empower other sites to do this work as well. So finally, I think just tying it all back into reconciliation action plans. If you don't have a RAP at your site yet, I really encourage you to go to the Narragansett website and register for a RAP. You can also get in touch with me to engage in maybe learning about the reconciliation action plan process. We've got a guided reconciliation action plan tour coming up that will help you to learn about the Narragansett tool and how you can use that to the best of your ability to develop a RAP. But a reconciliation action plan is a wonderful foundation for engaging children and young people in these processes. So the first thing that it really does is provides you with a structure. So instead of thinking about all the different ways in which you can engage, you know, your children in your site, your students, you can look at the reconciliation action plan and start planning for that, because it does support you to set goals and deliverables. And it has a bunch of resources related to those goals and deliverables, which means that, you know, you can set a goal around student engagement and then choose curriculum resources to better build your knowledge and capacity on what you want to do. The RAP process also really encourages and supports engaging different perspectives and making sure that you have a community approach to the development of your RAP. So the process already encourages having student engagement and involvement in that. And it's kind of set up to do that for you. And then finally, and I think this links so nicely to something that Julie said, it is like a mirror for you to look at your own practice. And so it encourages reflection. And through that engagement with children and young people, you can really, I guess, engage in processes that will encourage you to reflect on your own practice and who you are as a teacher and an educator. So really important stuff. I'm not going to go into any more detail about the RAPs tonight, because I know that you're probably all ready to go and have some dinner or a cup of tea, or I don't know, put on some telly or something like that. But that's kind of it for me. So I've just popped my email address up on the screen for any of you that would like that. You're welcome to get in contact with me. I probably won't respond until the end of Reconciliation Week, because it's a very busy time for us here at Reconciliation SA. But I just always like to finish with a call to action. So where to from here? You know, we get really stuck in these really big blue skies, ambitious ways of thinking when it comes to reconciliation, and that work is necessary. But also, what can you do tomorrow or next week? Are there things that you can do when it comes to youth voice? Maybe it's going away and reading some stuff about the Lundi model. Maybe it's reading that, you know, for those of you that might not have seen it, the Thinker in Residence stuff from Carla Rinaldi. That's really interesting if you're thinking about children as active citizens and members of our society. You might have a book or something that you want to read, or you might want to watch some, you know, some documentaries about how young people have engaged in other processes. There's some great work on how young people have engaged in sustainability work. You know, have a look and have a think and commit to an action that you can maybe do this week that will help you to learn a little bit more, because it's small steps to get to this kind of big goal that we're always trying to work towards, which is a just and reconciled Australia. So we've got a couple of minutes left of the webinar. If anyone has any questions, you can pop them in the chat. But otherwise, thank you so much for attending the webinar this afternoon. And thanks again. They're not here anymore, but our panel members were so amazing. So I'll sit here for a couple of minutes if you've got any questions, but otherwise enjoy your evening and thank you for joining us.